Okay, welcome everybody. Good morning. I'd just like to introduce you to some of our people up here. On the right-hand side, we have Dennis Bartlett. Dennis Bartlett was Bill North's mid-upper gunner, and this is Percy Cannings, who flew with Pathfinder Force and 100 Squadron, and completed an amazing 47 operations with Bomber Command. And Percy flew to many of the targets that Bill's crew and Dennis flew to. On my left here is Reese North, which is Bill North's son. That is Bill North up there. And on our far left we have Pam Livingston, who is the daughter of Bill's bomb aimer, Norman Jarvis. Now, I'll just introduce you to the crew. Now, this picture here was taken at this very base in 1944, March 1944. This is a Sterling, and it was used to convert the crew from training from Wellington's 2-engine aircraft to 4-engine aircraft. And we have Bill North here, who's the pilot, the bomb aimer, Norman Jarvis, and Pam is his daughter. We have the navigator, Flight Sergeant Dave Crowley, Monty Monteith, who is his wireless operator. This chap here was a spare crew member, not actually a member of the crew, but was just a spare temporary flight engineer called Jock. This is Les Morton, Sergeant Les Morton, who was Bill's flight engineer. We have Phil Morton here with us today. Phil Morton is Les's son and has come all the way from Australia to be with us here today, as has Pam as well. She's come specially from Australia to be with us. Sergeant Eddie O'Shea, the rear gunner, and Dennis Bartlett here in his younger days, and he was the mid-upper gunner. This was actually the picture that I saw that fascinated me when I was a child. I was 7 years old, and we moved into the house next door to Bill North, and when we got introduced to the family, this picture was up on his living room wall. It instantly fascinated me. I, just could not take my eyes off it, and it's fascinated me even to this day. Even now, looking at the crew standing there, it still gets me here. Now, the crew had some remarkable close escapes with death while they were training here at 1661 Heavy Conversion Unit. So while they were converting onto 4-engine Sterlings, they were flying this aircraft at this base in 1944. On one particular occasion, or two particular occasions, they had two near-death experiences while training with mechanical malfunctions on Sterlings. Now, Sterlings were very cumbersome, uncomfortable planes to fly, very unpopular with the crews. And many of these Sterlings had come from operational training units. They were clapped out, and these operational training units were given these Sterlings, which had been replaced by Lancasters and Halifaxes, which were far more reliable aircraft, could fly at greater heights, and had less mechanical problems. Now, we're just going to run through Bill's and Dennis's experiences while they were flying these Sterling bombers. And Reese and Pam and Les's son Phil will read the relevant part from the book. As you'll hear, they had quite a remarkable and extraordinary brush with death. Okay.
In February, we were introduced to the 4-engine aircraft for the first time, the largest of them all too, the Sterling. And here we were given the last member of our 7-man crew, our flight engineer, Sergeant Les Morton. It was Bill's first time as a captain of one of these big bombers that we got our first real shaking. Some hydraulic trouble developed, and we could not get our undercarriage down, So they told us from the ground to bring her in for a crash landing. We all took our crash positions and he put the 50,000-pound monster down on the runway. The shock of such a mass of metal on its belly was terrific. But apart from a few bruises, the whole crew walked away pretty fast out of the wreck and stepped into the waiting ambulance that took us for a routine medical inspection.
The first crash occurred on Monday 20th of March 1944 at Windfall and was due to the fact that the port wheel of the undercarriage wouldn't lock. We had an instructor called Private Officer Ball, DFM, with us on this training flight. My recollection is that when I lowered the undercarriage as part of my landing procedure, a red light showed, something which indicated that the undercarriage had not locked. In these circumstances, I took the normal action, rocking the aircraft alternately port to starboard, going into a reasonably steep dive and pulling up sharply, etc. All to no avail. The red light remained on. I was of course in contact with the control tower and was requested to fly at a low level near to the tower for observers to view the situation. Although everything appeared normal, the warning light remained on. I was given permission to land, adopted the recognised emergency procedure, ordered the crew to get into predetermined drill positions whereby they could brace themselves for the impact should the undercarriage collapse, as proved to be the case. On the ground and near the runway, an ambulance and fire engine were standing by. The crash landing was uneventful and no one was hurt.
The cable which operated the motor for the landing gear malfunctioned. Then I had to carry out the emergency landing procedure. Having done that with the help of Dave Crowley, we proceeded to turn the handle, which lowered the undercarriage, but the uplock hadn't released the screw jack. And with the extra pressure on the handle, it broke the uplock, which resulted in the port wheel swinging. On the second attempt, Bill put the aircraft down on a one-wheel landing. On later inspection, it was found that the star wheel had become corroded.
Okay, now these crashes, this particular crash happened just over there on the runway, part of the runway which still exists. Now, they had an even more horrific experience, again crashing in a Sterling, which we're going to find out what happened again now.
We flew again the following day, 21st of March 1944, completing all of our exercises. And then a short time afterwards, we had another much worse crash than the one on Whit Monday. This time, 2 engines failed on the port side not long after takeoff on a night cross-country. Then a third caught fire. It was a hell of a predicament and just on dark. We were losing height rapidly and it seemed almost too low to risk bailing out when suddenly out of the evening gloom appeared an aerodrome runway as if by magic. Bill swung the crippled kite and pointed it at the black stretch of runway. But the controls were dead as we were nearly at stalling speed and it was too late to drop the wheels. So in we went, touching down about halfway up the runway and then skidding through the far fence. I can still see the high bank of a gully looming up in front of us, but we stopped just short of it. I helped Bill out and when we stepped from the top hatch, it was good to see the rest of the crew safe again. But this time, more shaken and trembling. An ambulance was right on the job again, so once more we visited the MO, the medical office. The track we ploughed was plainly visible and the propellers were lying along it. Later, she blew up and caught fire. In those days, there were some very unfortunate accidents in other crews, many of them fatal. On one occasion, we saw a Sterling go straight in from 1,000 feet, killing the whole crew in front of our eyes. It was only to be expected and it did not bear thinking about too much. Personally, I always liked flying and learned to do nearly everyone else's job in the aircraft. Our crew always got along quite well, but Bill and I were the only two who were very close, on and off duty. We had a lot of good times. His girlfriend, WAF Sheila Randall, and mine were great friends as well.
The second Stirling crash took place on Friday, 7th of April 1944, and potentially this mishap was far more serious. We were taking off at dusk on a night exercise when one of the engines caught fire. We attained the height of not more than 1,000 to 1,200 feet. A second engine began to lose power. We were too low for me to instruct the crew to bail out, and I was losing height fast. I used a procedure called feathering the engines, which altered the pitch of the props to create the least wind resistance or drag, which could make it harder to control the aircraft. However, a third engine caught fire as well, which we feathered too. The situation was desperate, and as Norman Jarvis said, we were in a hell of a predicament. I ordered the flight engineer, Sergeant Les Morton, to restart one of the engines. He didn't want to restart the feathered engine, as it might explode. I said, if you don't start it, I won't have enough power to continue, and we will drop like a stone. After a slight disagreement, Les successfully restarted the engine. The crew were ordered to get into their emergency positions, and I prepared to crash land when, very luckily, I spotted a runway ahead that just seemed to appear out of nowhere, and decided to immediately attempt a landing. I took action to lower the undercarriage. My intention, hopefully, was to save the aircraft and avoid a crash landing. There was insufficient time for the undercarriage to get into the lock position. Consequently, when we landed, we sped along the runway at quite a speed and for quite a distance before the undercarriage collapsed and we finally came to a halt. I learned later on that I had landed downwind. I'd come in the wrong way, down the runway, a consideration which was not uppermost in my mind. Luckily for us, there were no aircraft taking off at the same time as we were coming in. The crew all very quickly left the aircraft because of the danger of the fuel igniting and causing an explosion. I was the last one to leave and was banging my fists in frustration on the cockpit control panel, shouting out loud, "These bloody Stirlings have nearly killed us twice. They're bloody useless." And that was the polite version of what I said. Norman Jarvis came back for me and said, "Hurry up, Bill. If you don't get out now, she's going to blow." Shortly afterwards, the aircraft exploded.
Thanks, Reese. Now, I'm just going to read Dennis Bartlett's part, if you're good with that, Den. Yep. Warrant Officer Dennis Bartlett. I remember both our crashes in Stirlings during HCU really well. On the first crash, Bill couldn't get the port undercarriage to lock. He tried a few tricks, like rocking the aircraft from side to side and diving steeply and pulling up sharply. But none of this worked, and the warning light stayed on. We flew past the control tower for a visual, and they gave us the all clear to land. The undercarriage collapsed as we were landing, and the Stirling hit the runway with a hell of a bang. We were all thrown around and had some bruises, but we got out of the wrecked plane pretty quickly and all agreed that it was a close call. The second crash came shortly afterwards and was a more shocking experience. We'd only just taken off on a night exercise when an engine caught fire. I could see the whole drama unfolding from the mid-upper turret. I could see the flames and smoke trailing off behind us. Bill feathered the engine, and then another engine failed, and we started to lose power and height. Bill feathered this engine too, and then another engine caught fire. We only had one engine left and were rapidly losing height. Bill managed to restart an engine, and then suddenly out of nowhere a landing strip appeared. With just enough power to land, Bill brought the Stirling down the wrong way on the runway. Luckily, nothing was taking off. When we hit the ground, the noise of the aircraft crashing down the runway was deafening. We went through a fence and finally came to a stop by a bank in a ditch, and all piled out as quickly as we could. Norman had to go back and get Bill out of the cockpit, and we saw the wreckage scattered down the runway. The emergency crews were standing by to help us. We were all really shaken up and realised we had come very close to being killed. Bill kept his nerve and stayed calm right through both these crashes. He really was an outstanding pilot. I don't think we would have made it without him. He was nicknamed Pranger North on the base after this second crash, which he took in good spirits. It was something we could not dwell on, but just laugh about.
We had just become airborne when the port outer engine malfunctioned, and then the port inner caught fire. The aircraft wouldn't maintain height on two engines, and breaking through the cloud at about 1,000 feet, we sighted an airfield, which appeared from out of the cloud. We were descending rapidly. Bill wanted to unfeather the port inner engine, but I advised him not to. I managed to restart an engine, and it gave us just enough power to land. Then I selected undercarriage down, and then we hit the deck. The undercarriage, being halfway down, took the initial shock, then collapsed. We careered along the runway until the aircraft came to a stop, and then there was a mad scramble to get out.
The accident rate at operational training units was horrendous. From 1939 to 1945, 5,327 officers and men were killed, and a further 3,113 were injured in training accidents, with some training courses losing 25% of their trainees. Tour-expired crew posted to instruct in tired and under-maintained bombers soon found out it was no rest cure. While Bill and his crew were at operational training units during 1943, the losses on two-engine aircraft were as follows: 425 Wellingtons, 72 Whitleys and 6 Ansons. During 1944, while Bill and his crew were here at RAF Winthorpe, 41 Sterlings Mark 1s and 99 Sterlings Mark 3s were lost. 26 of them were here at RAF Winthorpe. 2 of them were Bill's. And Lancasters were the lowest, with 9 losses, only one of them a Lancaster 3, proving the Lancaster was by far the safest aircraft to fly in. They were posted from here to Skellingthorpe to 61 Squadron on the 7th of May 1944, and very, very quickly they were put on to operations. Now, I discovered during my time researching all Bill's operations the astounding number of men that were lost in Bomber Command during the war. 55,573, which is nearly half of the men who joined Bomber Command, were lost. Now, Bill had a book in his front room called Bomber Command Losses for the Second World War by W.R. Chorley, which is this book here. My first experience of looking through this book, Bill asked me to find a page which was dated the 5th of July 1944. Now, on this page we have Bill's crew, and it was when they were shot down on the 5th of July, and this is the crash landing site in France where they crashed. Bill said, have a look through the page and tell me what you see. So I looked down the pages, and halfway down we have Pilot Officer North and his crew. And Bill said, what do you see beside the names? I looked down and said, POW, EVD, POW, POW. Now basically the whole crew survived this night, and they had a remarkable experience. On the 5th of July they were sent to the flying bomb storage site at St. Lou. On the way home they were shot down by a night fighter, and during this experience the whole plane had got wrecked. Bill was shot through his arm and shot through his leg. He immediately instructed the crew to bail out. Now Dennis, who was sitting in the mid-upper turret, didn't hear the bailout order because his intercom had been smashed. The whole mid-upper turret had disintegrated around him. He was shot to pieces, and he literally saw the bullets flying right past him. And the only damage he had were a few sort of injuries to the inner parts of his leg. The rear gunner, Sergeant Eddie O'Shea, bailed out. The bomb aimer, Norman Jarvis, bailed out, followed sharply by the navigator. The flight engineer and the wireless operator's parachutes were completely shot to pieces. They let Bill know that they couldn't jump. Now, Bill decided immediately that he was going to crash land the aircraft. There was no way he was going to leave them behind. So, damaged at night time in unfamiliar territory, with a horrific injury to his left arm, which was useless because the nerve was severed by the bullets, he brought their Lancaster EE-186 QRD down in this French field at night time, remarkably regaining control just as they came over the treetops, and he brought it in at an extreme sort of angle with the tail down to try to avoid igniting the fuel in the tanks. Quite remarkably, extraordinarily, the fuel didn't ignite. There was no explosion, and they all survived the crash. Dennis, the wireless operator, Monty Monteith, and the flight engineer all helped Bill out of the top of the cockpit and carried him as far away as possible as they could. Dennis and Monty both stayed with Bill because he was obviously injured and they didn't want to leave him. The flight engineer escaped and the navigator escaped as well. The rear gunner, Eddie O'Shea, got caught by the Germans, and the bomb aimer, Norman Jarvis, was also caught by the Germans, but he had quite severe injuries. And the crew were all brought back together and became POWs. Now, through this whole experience, Dennis has confirmed in his eyewitness accounts that Bill, again, stayed cool, calm, and completely in control, and knew exactly what he was doing. And as Bill said to me on one occasion, when we were talking about this whole experience, that his only fear was letting his crew down. And we can safely assume that Bill never, ever let his crew down. On to the next operations, and we're going to hear some eyewitness accounts from Percy, and some more from Norman Jarvis as well. So, we're going to have a quick look at one of the operations that Percy Cannings flew on alongside Bill North. When I met Percy, we soon discovered by looking at their logbooks that Bill and Percy had flown on a few operations together. Now, Percy was with 97 Squadron Pathfinder Force. Now, the Pathfinder Force had a remarkable role within Bomber Command. They flew ahead of the main force and they marked the target for the main force to come through, and they used a combination of different marking techniques, from parachute flares to target indicators, which were coloured red, green or yellow. And Percy had a flexible role with the 97 Squadron Pathfinder Force, and they would drop different combinations of markers onto the targets, and they would be instructed by a master bomber who would give instructions over the VHF. If the target needed remarking, if the flares hadn't gone down at the right point or they'd gone out, Percy would be circling the target with the other Pathfinders to remark the target. So they didn't just go in and out, they had to hang around and circle the target area. And the skies over the target areas were very congested. There were many, many dangers faced. There were mid-air collisions, there were bombs from above, there was flak, night fighters, all sorts of dangers. We're going to look at operation number 13, which was to a place called Limoges in France. And Percy was flying on this operation. Now, before Percy was up in the air for the main operation that night, he was on a training exercise in the daytime in a group of 6 Lancasters that were flying in formation. And Percy experienced an awful training accident, which he will now explain to you.
One of the most vivid memories I have of the tragic training accident on the 23rd of June 1944, before we flew later that night on ops to Limoges. This day is also Sandy's birthday, so I'm constantly reminded as the years gone by. We were on a formation flying exercise with 6 Lancasters from the squadron, including my crew skippered by Bill Reid. The formation of flying in 2 V shapes, with my crew in the second V. Flight Lieutenant H.S. Van Ralph Lancaster, ME625, was ahead of us to the right in the first V formation, and he suddenly got caught in the slipstream of the leading aircraft. The result was that Van Ralph Lancaster side-slipped over Flight Lieutenant Perkins Lancaster, ND981, which was slightly below him. Then, as everyone in the formation watched in utter horror, Van Ralph Lancaster then dropped suddenly and collided with Perkins Lancaster. It removed the entire tail section from Perkins' plane and smashed the nose section of Van Ralph's aircraft. Both aircraft disintegrated, plunged into the fields below. They missed us by inches. We saw one parachute open as the 2 aircraft went down. One of the 2 crews, 8 in Van Ralph's and 6 in Perkins, there was only one survivor from the Perkins crew. That was Sergeant Cohen, who had managed to bail out, but he lost his nerve and never flew again. The station hushed it all up, and the surviving crew member was posted to LMF, lack of moral fibre.
What's also remarkable about that experience is that Percy and his comrades witnessed this awful accident, and they flew on ops the same night, carrying on regardless. There was no time for emotions to, drag them down. They just kept going. And the wreckage of these 2 aircraft can actually be seen at the Aviation Heritage Centre at East Kirkby, where we were yesterday. Now, this operation that we're going to look at was to a place, again, in France, to bomb the flying bomb sites, the V1 storage sites, which were menacing London and the southeast. As much as 50 a day were landing, and Bomber Command diverted some of its resources to attack these flying bomb sites.
Bill was by this time one of the top skippers, and we were considered to be one of the veteran crews. We were going in on the first wave and often getting back first to Skellingthorpe. We were also very confident in our ability and thought, well, the Jerrys will be good if they get us. Until the night the 2 senior men of the squadron did not return from a very sticky job in the Pas-de-Calais area on the 24th, 25th of June, which was then the main source of the V1 flying bombs. We spent a long time over the target and were coned by searchlights for quite a while and saw the boys going down on all sides.
When we were coned that night, I tried every trick in the book to get away from those searchlights. I threw that aircraft all over the sky, and it took everything I gave it. I could make the Lancaster do whatever I wanted it to do. I really did things to that aircraft that shouldn't have been done to it. But we were in a desperate state and had to get out of the cone. The German AA was throwing everything it had at us, and night fighters were tearing into the main force. In that situation, our chances of surviving were extremely low. We ended up out over the English Channel, almost at sea level, before we were finally clear.
Searchlights were a terrible thing for the crews because what they did was when they were caught in a cone, they lost their night vision. So the whole sort of cockpit panel would be completely blinded by white light, as the other positions would be as well. Now Bill and the boys were coned for 5 minutes during this operation by an astounding 26 searchlights. Now, Percy keeps saying to me, I don't know how they managed to count 26, but 26 is the number. It's in the operational record book. Now, 22 aircraft were lost in the apocalyptic skies around Bill this night by night fighter activity aided by searchlights. Dennis Bartlett has also got some eyewitness account here. When we were coned on this mission, It was by a large number of searchlights and lasted for some time. From the mid-upper turret, you could see the searchlights streaking around the sky, and Bill would wave this way and that to avoid them. A blue radar-controlled master searchlight suddenly picked us up, and all the others, which were coloured white, swung in on us. When we were coned, it was so bright that we virtually got blinded. Bill threw the Lancaster all over the sky while trying to get away. Flak was blasting all around us, and we saw other aircraft going down. It was a hell of a ride. He dived steeply this way and that, and we eventually ended up out over the sea before we finally got away at very low altitude. The whole crew was relieved to have escaped, and Bill's calmness in a near-death situation had saved us all again. I'd never seen or been in a Lancaster that had been pushed to the limits like this. And Bill had quite a cheeky grin on his face when he was telling me about this experience. He actually enjoyed the ride. He enjoyed pushing the Lancaster to its extreme limits and got quiet satisfaction from saving his crew yet again. Now, Percy Cannings also has some eyewitness account of searchlights.
Yeah, there was always plenty of flak and searchlights, which I particularly did not like, having been coned by them on my first tour. I swear my skipper, Flight Lieutenant Ken Harvey, a Canadian, had the Lancaster upside down, as the contents of the Elsend toilet had been strewn all over the inside of the plane and me. I bet the ground crew did not particularly like cleaning that lot up. But the main problem about being coned was both gunners and pilot lose all vestige of night vision for at least 15 minutes, even if one catches you just in passing. I did not like searchlights at all. It also allowed the fighter to see you more clearly. If on seeing a fighter, I would call out to a skipper to corkscrew in the direction the fighter was coming from. This would either be to port or to starboard. That's when the adrenaline rush really kicked in.
Thank you, Percy. And the contents of the Elsend toilet must have been not very nice to be, yeah, not for anybody. Okay, now I'm going to have a final look at an operation that they flew on. This operation was on the 15th, 16th of June 1944 to bomb German fuel dumps at a place called Châtellerault in France. It was tactical ops to support D-Day landings. They were attacking flying bomb sites, German armoured divisions which were being brought up to reinforce the German army at the Pas de Calais. And they also were attacking the fuel sites of the German army as well. And this was all to do with trying to delay and trying to slow down the German army and their reinforcements up to the D-Day landing area. And they also actually flew on D-Day the 6th of June as well. Now, on this operation to Châtellerault, Bill and his crew witnessed a Lancaster explode in the sky next to them. And it was one of their own squadron crews from 61 Squadron. And it's believed that this Lancaster was hit by bombs from above. Now, if you can imagine, at night time, they were flying at different heights. So if you had one aircraft at 10,000 foot, another at 7, another at 5, they were all flying at different heights. So on the bombing run, they would all be releasing their bombs within a 10-minute period over the target. So you can imagine bombs from 10,000 foot above could quite possibly hit a Lancaster below at, say, 5,000 feet. Now, Percy Cannings had an experience on the last mission of his tour and witnessed bombs from above hitting a Lancaster in the formation next to him and exploding. Now, at night time, you wouldn't have seen these bombs, how close they came, but on the daytime operations, all the crews could quite clearly see how close these bombs came, and it was very unnerving. Dennis also explained to me that on their first daylight operation, which was to Beauvau in France, the bombs from above were coming very, very close by, and they kept calling out to Bill, "Bombs from above, coming very close, skipper." And Percy will now share his experience of exactly that.
My last operation was a daylight raid to Dealing, which was German airfield. On 15th of August 1944, in ND 961, the Squadron letters OFN, we knew this was my last op and were really keen to get it over and done with. However, it was shockingly nearly the end of our crew. On these daylight raids, we flew closer together, and it was plain to see how near the bombs from above actually fell. And in this occasion, it was one below us and just behind us. It's something you wouldn't be aware of at night time. This exploded in a huge fireball. These bombs literally passed within 5 foot of our Lancaster, just missing us as well. The explosion was a terrible thing to see, and it shattered our rear turret and put holes in our fuselage. Bob Lasham from 97 Squadron, which was my squadron, was also in that same formation, and said one of his gunners saw the bombs from above fall past, hitting this same aircraft below them. The rear turret was completely severed, and his gunner vividly remembers the aircraft fall apart and the turret tumbling down with the rear gunner still inside. The other 97 Squadron Lancaster in their formation was PB 358 OFJ, which was flown by Flying Officer BB Lindsay. Had 2 engines damaged by the explosion as well. This aircraft ditched in the sea off the Dutch coast, and a German E-boat was dispatched to pick up the crew. This E-boat was chased off by an American Thunderbolt that was escorting the formations, and the crew were all rescued by one of our high-speed launches. The whole of this crew were back on base at Coningsby the next day. We arrived safely back, and I breathed a sigh of relief. My second tour of ops was finally over.
Thank you, Percy, and that's quite remarkable to have flown 47 operations with Bomber Command and survived to tell the tale. Now, Bill and his whole crew, including Dennis, witnessed an aircraft explode in front of them on their first operation to Lille. On the bombing run, an aircraft not far away ahead of them completely exploded, and they flew right through the wreckage with remarkably no damage coming to their aircraft. Reese will just share how Bill's sort of felt when they saw these things happen.
We had seen other aircraft explode on bombing runs before. It happened at Lille. We were well aware that we'd seen a Lancaster explode at Chateau Roulet and how it made us feel. I didn't know, however, that this was Jack Goodyear and his crew until you explained this to me, Chris. We also saw many big orange explosions on the ground and could still see fires burning half an hour after we had left the target.
Thanks, Reese. Now, we're going to wind up here. I would just like to finish on this note, and that is that within the pages of this book are the experiences of the men who served with Bomber Command. One of them was my next door neighbour, Bill North, Reese's father, who I grew to realise was actually an extraordinary man. The older I grew up and the more I heard about his experiences, the more I realised that my friendly and unassuming next door neighbour was actually an extraordinary man who'd been through some remarkable experiences with his crew and the other members of Bomber Command. These pages also reveal Dennis Bartlett's experiences, which he didn't talk about for a long, long time. His family didn't get to hear until very, very recently his experiences and how he felt and what he thought. He had pretty much kept it to himself for 60 odd years. And another remarkable thing that happened is that we tracked Dennis down. Nobody had seen him for a long, long time, and we reunited him with Bill in March 2011. And to witness these two veterans meeting up again after 67 years was really an honour and a privilege. So there you have it. We have mid-air collisions, we have night fighters, bombs from above, mechanical malfunctions, training crashes, operational crashes, POW experiences. We have the whole war diary of Norman Jarvis which you're welcome to look at. You're welcome to look at the flight logbooks of Bill, and into any of these books here we have. We've got Les Morton's flight logbook here as well. And you're welcome to come and talk to us or ask us any questions. And it really is quite a remarkable thing that these men survived the whole war. And Bill himself was never awarded any form of medal at all for his courage and bravery on the night that they crash landed, which was always a bit of a puzzle to the family and friends and people that knew Bill. But I asked Bill what his feelings about that were, and Bill, in his unassuming and humble way, said, "Chris, I was just happy to survive the war and be here now to share my experiences with you." So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very, very much for listening, and please come and buy a book.